Last time I mentioned we're going to install all the servos, and I'd like to do that all at once. Again, there's 3 servos: aileron, rudder, elevator. This is the aileron servo in the wing here, and you notice that I have it up at an angle. And the reason I did that is for a couple reasons. There's no good way to get to the adjustment screw if you were to lay the servo on its side, because then the servo would be the servo arm would be buried somewhat in the wing. And if you put it the servo flat, flush with the face of the upper surface of the wing, the control arm off the servo wouldn't reach the push rods, which I think you can see are buried about a third of the way down inside the wing. So what I've done on this and a number of other Alphas is mount the servo up at an angle. Now you got to be a little careful because there's not much headroom up here where the servo goes into the fuselage. They do have an opening there in the bottom of the fuselage. There's a plastic tray. I'll show you that in a second. But then there's a floor under which I have the ESC, and that restricts the amount of height you have to mount the servo. But the setup that I have here works, and it also allows the control arm to line up pretty good with the 2 push rods, each coming in from the ailerons. I wanted to also show you real quick that on the aileron side, I taped each aileron in neutral with a piece of auto body tape so it doesn't pull off any foam or paint. And whenever you're setting up servos, you have to keep your surfaces in neutral, because if you hook the servo up, a couple of things can happen. First of all, if you don't center your servos before you install them, and I'll tell you what I mean by that in a second, when you turn the radio on, the servo is going to go to its actual center that's electronically set within the servo, and it'll deflect. You run the possibility of it deflecting the ailerons one way or another. And if you don't set the ailerons in neutral, the other reason is the other problem that you can run into, you'll just have ailerons that can never be trimmed out. So always, when you're setting up servos, always put your control surfaces in neutral, either with tape or 2 sticks of wood with the rubber bands around them, and that'll hold them in place while you're installing the servo and the arms. What I have to do now, since there are 2 servo push rods coming in from either side of the wing to the center, I have to slip the easy connector, which is this gizmo right there. I have to slip that over one push rod, and then over the other push rod. So let me do that now while you're watching. So you also notice that the servo has a little keeper on the back. That's a steel keeper. I use a piece of tubing to set those on, and they really grip well, so they won't come off. It's helpful to have a little hooked tool to do this. So you slide it over one arm. It's a little tedious. And you get it. Get the other push rod and slide it over that. Okay, so now I've captured. So you can see here that I've captured both arms with the keeper. Then what I like to do is everything's in neutral. The servo's centered. Now I'll take the set screw for the easy connector and tighten that down. And then what I like to do is line up the 2 push rods and put a dot of solder on one side or perhaps even both sides. And that'll ensure that the push rods don't loosen up or shift when the servo actuates. The elevator servo is installed and working with the given push rod that was already routed by the manufacturer. You can see here I hooked it up with a fairly long arm, and I routed it against the fuselage side, because if you look in here you can see that Alfa has already routed that push rod forward. And then forward of that, on the other side of the fuselage, I put in the rudder servo, which is there, and there's no push rod as of yet, although I started routing it through the tail. But in order to get it forward, I'll show you what you have to do. Let me show you where I put it in the fuselage. I just cut a little angular hole in the tail with a sharpened piece of tube, and routed a number 847 Dubro micro push rod through. But I have to finish the routing, and the only way you can do that is by opening up the fuselage. The Alfa has a vacuum form piece that covers a lot of the bottom of the fuselage, and so it's this section here that we're going to take out. And what I use for that is at first I line it with a pencil to show me where I'm going, and then I take a carbide pen or whatever, scribe, and scribe that line all the way around. And what that does, that gives me a slight indentation in the plastic, so that when I actually go to cut it with a knife, the knife will follow that indentation. So I'm going to cut this out right now, while we watch. So let's hope I don't mess it up. The key is to make a number of cuts and not just one deep one. See, it's going through already. It's fairly thin. So as long as you follow the scribe line pretty closely, it doesn't have to be perfect. There you go. Yeah, that one was scribed pretty deeply. And then just along the other side here. Oops. There you go. A couple of cuts is really all you need, but you got to kind of be careful. Okay. So you can take that away, and that gives you some room to get your hands on the push rods where they come through the fuselage, and just kind of opens things up. You can get to the cockpit also if you want to cut the cockpit bottom out and put a pilot in from the bottom without taking the canopy off. You can do that too now. And this cutting that away does not affect the structural integrity of the model. I did the same thing on my other plane. It has a lot of flights on it with no problem. So what I have to do now is finish routing the rudder push rod, and then we're going to get on to actually cutting off the rudder and making a leading edge for it, and then hinging it up.